In this video, you're going to learn how to make your own ad blocking Chrome extension that of course doesn't spy on you and doesn't have any malicious things in it because of course you're the one who is going to create it. And while doing so, you're going to learn everything that goes behind it and how most ad blockers work. And let's go ahead and actually test it out. So I'm going to turn it off and we're going to go to this page. Let's refresh it. And this is what it's going to look like with all of the ads. We can even go to all of the other pages. And of course, all of the ads are going to show up. But as soon as I turn on the ad blocker and refresh the page, we can see that there's no more ads, and same goes for all of the different pages that have ads on them. And of course, there's features like turning off the ad blocker for certain pages. Let's say that we wanted ads on this page, for example. Well, we can do that. And if we go to any of the other pages and refresh, we can see that there's no ads. And same goes for if we turn it off for the whole website. And that means the domain. So all of these websites are from the same domain. So if we go to the second page and refresh, we can see that the websites are back. And of course, if we turn everything back on, so let's go ahead and do that, everything saves. And since the page was off over here, it's still saved, so it's still going to be off here. And of course, we can turn it back on and everything works. And there's another cool little touch, and that would be a Three.js model that I've added into this Chrome extension, just so that you have the fun of actually using Three.js in a real project. And again, everything works perfectly well, even with the Three.js Earth model. And before we start, make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel to not miss any upcoming content like this. Comment down below if you have any questions or if you have anything else you'd like to say. But now, let's get started. As always, go to your desktop, right click anywhere and press on open in terminal. This is going to open your PowerShell, and here we are going to run npm create, and this is going to be a V project, so V at latest. We're going to call this add underscore blocker, and let's press on enter. Here we're going to choose React, JavaScript, and now we're going to cd to the folder, so cd ad blocker. Let's install everything, so npm install, and wait for this to finish. And now that it's done, let's install one more dependency. So npm install vite plugin static and then copy. And now that it's done, let's open this in VS Code by writing code space period, which will open our editor. And we're going to start by going inside of our source folder and removing the app.css. Let's go inside of our app.jsx, clear all of this out, return an h1. Just going to say hello world, and let's add a class name of text 3xl, font of bold, and then also an underline. To see that our tailwind works whenever we actually add it, let's remove these three imports. And now I'm going to want you to go down in the details below and find the ad blocker GitHub repository that I have created, and we're going to go inside of the commits, go to the initial commit, the second one, and press on browse repository so that you don't copy anything that you shouldn't have by accident. And here we're going to go inside of the public folder, and we're going to start with the models folder. So let's go ahead and let's start with the earth.jlb. So make sure you download it. Download the second one too. And let's go to the background.js. Wait for it to load. We can skip this because this is a JavaScript file. Let's copy the brush fill. So go in here, download it. Let's do the same with the normal brush. Let's save the logo.png, reload.svg, and this is going to be it for now. So now I'm going to minimize it and drag and drop all of these inside of the public folder. So let's start with the earth, and for some reason it has a 1 in there. But it's totally fine. So let's drag and drop that in here. Let's do the larger earth. Now let's go ahead and create a folder called models where we're going to put both of these inside of. So let's copy them, and I'm going to remove this one in here. Let's go back, and now we have the background.jpg, then the two SVGs. So let's drag and drop them. Then we have our logo, and then the reload SVG, and then the earth again. So let's make sure that we have everything. Let's go ahead and actually create these files too. And we are also going to copy all this. So copy this, go public, rules.json, paste everything in here. And I'm going to go over this file later on in the video. So again, make sure you watch everything to not miss that part out. And let's find the background. So for the background, we already have some code in here, but we are not going to do anything with that. We're just going to create our own background.js. And now there's, I'm pretty sure, one more thing to do, and that's to go inside of the source folder and copy the index.css. So let's go ahead and do that. Paste everything in here. And now there's one more thing to do, and that would be to install Tailwind. So write npm install Tailwind CSS, and also add Tailwind CSS vite, and of course wait for everything to finish installing. And once it's done, we're going to go inside of the vite.config.js, and we're going to simply add Tailwind in here. So import Tailwind CSS, and we're going to add it right over here. So Tailwind CSS. And now all that we have to do is run npm run build. And so what that does is it created a folder for us with all of our different files here, including of course the background, rules, and so on. And we have our assets, and that's where all of our code is. So as we can see, all of our React got compiled into this file, and then our CSS, same thing in here. But now what I'm gonna want you to do is go to your browser, go to the three dots at the very top, go to extensions, and press on manage extensions, which will open this page. And here, if you haven't done this already, your developer mode is going to be turned off, but you're going to want to turn it on. And then you're going to want to press on load unpacked. And here you're going to want to go to your desktop and then find the ad blocker. And then here we're just going to go inside of the dist folder that was created and press on select folder. Now it says manifest file missing. So that's definitely something that I forgot to add. So let's go inside of the public here, find the manifest.json file, and we're going to copy all of this. And now we're going to go inside of the public folder, create the manifest.json file. It's kind of funny because without this file, obviously the extension can't work, because this file contains all of the information about the extension. So things like the manifest version, the name, and then the version of the extension. And then there's things like the description. And so these are all the permissions that will eventually let us run the extension, like this declarative net request, which will let us block all of the ads. Then there's things like host permissions, the background. So the service worker is going to be this background.js file right over here. And then there's the default pop-up. So that's things that we don't have to worry about because Vite does this stuff for us. And then again, the declarative net request. So later on in the video, you're going to stand all of this, but we're going to have our rule resources, and the ID that we have for this rules.json is going to be ruleset_1. And if you ever want to add new ones or maybe add it on top of this one, then again, you can make another one with a different ID, of course, and the path for a different rules.json file. And then for icons, this is going to be the logo of our website or favicon, and everything's going to work. But of course, we're going to have to run npm run build, which is going to compile everything. And now we should be able to press on retry. And here's going to be our extension. And to find it, we're going to go to the very top here to the extensions, and we are going to pin it so that we don't have to go here every time. And when we press on it, we can see our extension with the text of hello world being large, underlined, and also bolded, which means that Tailwind worked. And of course, the background image comes from the index.css, and then also this is going to be the image. And so of course, this is going to be the outcome. Now that we have our Tailwind working, let's go back to VS Code and start adding our content. So let's switch out this h1 with the div, which is going to have a class name of width full, height full. We're also going to add a padding top of 1, and we're going to add a select of none, which means that the user is not going to be able to select anything. And you'll see why later on in the video. So in here, we're going to have an h1, which is going to say ad blocker. So that's kind of just like the title, but you don't really need to have one. It's kind of just for look. So ad blocker, and the classes are going to be text to Excel. And then here we're going to set the text color to be a custom one. And you can do that in Tailwind by adding the square brackets. And then here you can pretty much just put the hex color of the color. The hex for this blue color is going to be 60 capital B, 5 capital FF, and now we should be able to see it. So it's going to be this blue color. And then we're also going to set the font to be medium. And then also we're going to set the text to be center. Let's also run npm run dev just to see what this looks like. And so there it is. What I'm going to do is actually put this beside VS Code. I'm going to minimize it. And let's also add a border of 1, border of 2, just so that we can see the Chrome extension. So this right here would be our Chrome extension, and of course we're going to remove that later on, but that's just so that we can see the boundary, since the background is way larger than the actual extension. But under the h1, we're going to create a div, which is where is going to be our toggle for the ad blockers. So this div is going to have a class name of width full. Display property is going to be grid. We're going to set the items to be center. We're going to justify center, and then height is going to be 10 out of 12. And so inside of this div here, we're going to have our kind of outer circles. So let's create it. And I'm actually going to close this so that we have more room to see the code. And you can toggle that by holding Control B. But here we're going to have a class name. So class name of width of 40, height of 40, rounded of full, which is going to make it a circle, justify center. And the display here is going to be flex. Items are going to be center, and then justify center 2. And then we're also going to add a cursor of pointer. And for now, we're going to set the background to be the same hex color. So there it is. And later on, depending on if we want to have the 3D model here, we can set it to nothing, but you'll see how all of this works in a bit. And for some reason, I put all of the classes in apostrophes, so I'm just going to fix that real quick. There we go. And so inside of this div, here we are going to have our actual toggle. And so for the toggle, we're going to create a separate component because here we're going to be switching from the very basic toggle to our 3D model. So we're going to go to source, create a folder called components, and in here, our component is going to be called the toggle section.jsx. Let's create the component, so const toggle section, and then here we are going to return a div. So div, there we go. And then let's export that here. So export default toggle section. Here we are going to make an index.js file just so that we'll be able to import all of the different components in one line. So import toggle section, but I mean, right now we don't really need to do that, but it's good practice. So here we are going to import it. So toggle section, there it is. And now let's add all the classes. So class name is going to be width of 10 out of 12. Same goes for the height. So 10 out of 12. Rounded will be full. It's going to be a grid. And on hover, we're going to set the width to be full. Same goes for the height. So height full on hover. There it is. And then let's add a transition of all. And for now, let's just add a background of the gray color that I had. So the hex color for that would be 434F5A. And that should be it. So let's see if it's even in there. I'm going to move this to the very bottom. Do this. And let's see. So we got the div. And of course, it's not going to show anything because we haven't called it in here, but here's going to be our gray section. And we can see that when we hover, there's this nice animation because when it's not hovered, the width is set to be 10 out of 12. There it is. And then when we hover, same goes for the height, but when we hover it, we're setting the width and height to be full. And of course, we have the transition all, which adds this nice animation effect. So now what we're going to do is add a paragraph with a class name of font bold. Text will be for Excel. Text will be in the center, my of auto. And for now, we're just going to say on. And so here's going to be our very basic on and off button. But of course, whenever we press on it, nothing happens. So let's actually create a hook for that. Let's go back in our app.jsx. And this hook is going to be called enable. Or actually, let's call it enabled and then set enabled. Let's set that to be true. And of course, let's pass in our hook in here. So instead of saying enabled equals enabled and set enabled equals enabled, one thing that we can do is pass it on like this. So ... and then we can pass it on as an object. And then when we have different hooks or variables that we need to pass, we can just add them in here. But here we can get our hooks, so enabled and set enabled. And then let's create a function, handle toggle. And then for now, let's just set enabled to be not enabled. And so on click, we are going to run handle toggle. And let's also change the classes a little bit depending on if the hook is enabled or not. So in here, let's cut everything, paste everything back. Let's cut out the background color. And then we're going to say if enabled, we're going to set the background color to this, else it's going to be set to the blue background color that we had. So there we go. And then we're going to go back into the app, into this div over here. We're going to cut everything again, paste everything back in, and same goes for the background color here. So we're going to cut that and then enabled. Then we're going to have the background color, else we're just going to leave it at blank. So it's smaller and doesn't work because I added an apostrophe. And let's see, of course it still says on even though it's off, and that's because in here we haven't changed the text depending on if it's enabled or not. So let's go ahead and do that, and now we can see that it's off, and when we press on it, this is what it looks like when it's on. And of course you can play with the colors and really flip them if you want, or do whatever you want with them. It's all up to you, but I'm going to keep it like this. And now let's actually work on the pages and websites buttons, which are going to be at the very bottom, which are going to disable the ad blocker longer on the page or on the actual website. So to do that, we're going to go back into the app.jsx, and here we are going to have another component. So in components, let's create a bottom section.jsx file, and then const bottom section. Here we are going to return a blank div, and then let's export that. So default bottom section, and then here we will import bottom section and export it in here too. And this is what I meant by having all of the imports in one line. So here we can also import the bottom section instead of doing something like import toggle section from components and then toggle section and then doing the same thing for the bottom section. But we're going to copy that and put it right over here actually. So bottom section, and there we go. So now it's spaced out a little nicer. And here we're going to start with the div, which is going to have a class of full width, height, which will be 10 out of 12, and then grid rows 2, and then gap of 1. And then here's where we're going to have our pages button. So class name of width full, height of full, flex, and then flex between, and then we're going to add a rounded of medium, and then the background will be the blue, so that's the gray. Let's change that to the blue. There we go. And in here I'm going to close that, but in here we're going to have a paragraph which is going to say page, and then the class name will be TextXL, MY of auto, and then padding left of 2. Here is our page, and then under is where the button is going to be. So class name is going to be rounded, and of course type will be button. Class name will be margin left of auto, and then class is going to be width of 4 out of 12, height will be full, margin left will be auto, and we're going to set all of the border radius right to be 0.35 rem, so rounded right to be 0.35 rems, of course, and then display is going to be grid. And of course, we're going to add on focus, outline none. Then we're going to add a transition of all, and then duration of 300 milliseconds. And that will be for the animation that will be happening in here. But for now, we're not going to have it yet. So here we're going to add a paragraph with the class name of my of auto. Text will be center. Font will be medium. And then, of course, cursor of pointer. And for now, we're just going to say on, and then in the button, for now, we're going to set the background color to be the gray one that we had. So there it is. And the reason that we have the border radius is because if I, let's say, just remove that. So let's go ahead and cut this out. We can see that the button is over the div, which had the border radius, and that's why we had to add it so that it looks like this. And let's go ahead and do the same for the website. So we're just going to copy and paste this under, and we're going to change the background here to be the gray option that we had. So this one right here, and then we're going to change this to website, and then this is going to change to the blue color that we had. And there it is. So now we have to add the hooks for the pages and websites. So let's go back to the app.jsx, and here we're going to start with the pages. So pages, and then set pages. This will be a hook, which will be an object, because here we are going to have a few properties. The first one will be enabled. So if it's enabled or not, let's set this to false for now. Or actually, let's set this to true. Then we're going to have current, which means the current page that we're on. And we're going to set that to null. And then saved will be a blank array. So let's copy and paste this under. And then this one will be websites, set websites. Enabled, we're going to leave that at true here. And then for the current, going to stay at null. And then saved is going to stay the same. So now we're going to go inside of the bottom section, and we're going to pass those in here. So ... and let's start with pages, and then set pages, and then websites and set websites. And in here we are going to retrieve those. So pages, and then I'm just going to actually copy this, paste it in here. And now we are going to change the styling a little bit. So for the first button over here, let's cut this out. And then we are going to say that if the pages are enabled, then the background will be this, else the background will be blue, so nothing is going to change for now. And then also on hover, we are going to change the background to be blue, so let's do that. Or let's change this to 60. There it is. So now when we hover, we can see that it changes colors. And then we can copy this, and then we're going to say on hover, change it back to that. So let's go back in here and set the pages to be false. And now we can see that it's blue, but when we hover it, it changes back to gray. So we can keep that. And now let's also do the same thing for our websites. So right over here, we are going to copy all of this, and then we are going to paste it in here. And we can actually just copy this whole thing, paste it in here, and flip it around. So first thing is we have to add the money sign so that this works. And then just make sure that we fix everything so that there wouldn't be any errors. So there we go. And then now all that we have to do here is change this to websites, and then pretty much just flip everything. So this is going to go in here, this is going to go in here, and then I didn't copy everything. So on hover, we're going to change the background back to this. So now if we set this to false, we can see that it's going to be gray, and when we hover the button, it changes back to blue. And now let's go ahead and add very basic functions that pretty much just toggle these on and off. So let's start with the pages. So let's call this handle pages, toggle, and then in here, set pages to not set pages. And then we're going to do the same thing for the website. So handle websites toggle, and it's going to do the same thing, but just for the websites. And then we're going to go to our button and then add a non-click. This is going to be for the handle pages. So let's copy this, go back in here, and then change this to handle websites. And then when we press on these should be working. For some reason, this one doesn't seem to really work, or it does, never mind. I was just hovering, so the effect didn't work. There we go. We just have to change the text. So if pages are enabled, then it's going to be on, else it's going to be off. Same goes in here for websites. So there we go. So pages can be off, and when we press on it, it's going to be on. And then same goes for the website. So all of this works. And now let's actually go ahead and add the two toggles. So one is going to be the theme toggle, but we're not going to make it work right now because it adds a lot more stuff into our website and it makes the building process a lot longer. So right now, if I open another terminal and I run npm run build, we can see that this happens pretty quickly. But if we add Three.js and then Three.js and Fiber, then this will take a lot longer. But let's actually see what this looks like. So if we update it and open it, this is what it looks like. And of course, I forgot to remove the border, but that part doesn't really matter because it's very easy to remove it. But we can see that all of these buttons work, and it's pretty responsive and it looks very nice. But let's go ahead and actually add both of these buttons at the very top, just so that we're done with the visuals. So let's go back to our app.jsx, which I'm already on. And right over here where we have our h1, we're going to create a div and put everything in there just so that it doesn't get too confusing. And then we can start with our brush. So that will be the theme image, and the source will be brush.svg. So that, and there it is. This, we can just set this to brush, and let's add all of our classes. So class name, and then we're going to set that to be width of 6. Height of 6, that's going to be much smaller. We can set the position to be absolute. Top will be 3, left will be 4, and then we can add a cursor of pointer. And then on hover, let's add a very simple animation or effect. When we hover it, we're going to set the scale to be 105, and of course transition of all. And then we can also add a duration. So right now, if we hover it, we can see that it happens pretty quick. But if we add a duration of, let's just say 500, we can see that it takes much longer, but we're just going to set this to 400. So just like that. And then we're going to copy this, paste it right in here, and we're going to change this to right of 4 and then the top of 2, and then the sizing is going to be a little different since it's a different SVG, and this one will be the reload.svg, and for some reason still on the left, and that's because I forgot to change this. So this should be right, or sorry, top 2 and then right of 4. And of course, if we open it like this, it's going to be on the very right. But if I try to make the sizing a little bit more right, so if I make it larger and I do this, we can see that they look the same. And of course, right now it's going to look a little wrong, but that's fine, because again, we're using the absolute value. But when we're going to be in the Chrome extension, it's going to look the exact same as in here. So don't worry about that part. And we're going to make 2 more hooks. So one is going to be refresh, and the other will be the theme. So let's do refresh and then set refresh, which will be a use state of false. And then we're going to make another one, which will be the theme, set theme, and in this case, it's going to be false too. So in here for the theme, we are going to change the source based on the hook. So let's do that. And then theme, and I used an apostrophe, but now it should work. So if the theme is enabled, then we want to use the brush fill, else it's going to be the normal brush, and then we're going to use .svg, but for some reason I am getting an error. That's because right over here, forgot to add a colon, but .svg, and now we can see that nothing changed. But if we set this to be true, so now we can see that it's the filled up version, and we can find it right over here in the public. So this is the normal brush, and then this is the brush fill. So of course you can change that around if you wanted to, but there's not really much to do here. So let's just create a very basic toggle theme function. And for now, all that it's going to do is it's going to set the theme be not theme, and then we are going to add an on click here. So on click, we are going to toggle the theme. So now when we press on it, we can see that the source changes. So let's go ahead and work on our reload SVG now. So for the reload, this one's going to be a little bit different because it's only going to show up whenever we press on our enabled here or really any of these. So we're just going to refresh. So for that, what we're going to do is we're just going to change the x-axis and we're going to add a little transition there. So right over here, we're going to say that if refresh is enabled, again, let's fix that. So if refresh is enabled, then we're going to translate x to be 0. Else we will do translate x of 20, and let's fix that. So there it is. But if we set this to true now, it's just going to pop up in there. But let's just say that when we toggle the theme, we're going to set refresh to be not refresh, just so that we can see what it looks like. And there it is. That's going to be the animation. And now we can remove that because all of that works, and this will be set to false. So if we refresh, it's not going to be in there, and this is what our basic ad blocker is going to look like. So let's actually remove this border of 2 and then run npm run build, just so that we can see what it's going to look like as an extension. So now I'm going to add this back, so border of 2, so that we can keep working on it and see where the outlines are. So here, if we update it and open it, and so here's what it's going to look like. It looks really nice, and of course everything here works. Same goes for the buttons, and also the theme should be false, because currently it is the very basic one, but of course it doesn't really do anything yet. And we will add the functionality and of course the Three.js and the model later on in the video. So make sure that you watch this whole video to not miss that part out. And before we actually move on to adding the functionality for our ad blocker to actually work, I want to go over the rules.json file so that you can understand at least what all of this is and how the ad blocking is going to work. So first of all, the rules.json is going to be a list of network request blocking rules, which we're going to be using in our extension, which is used by the declarative net request API. And so each of these objects represents a rule that blocks a certain type of request to a specific ad related domain. So for example, this first one over here, the ID is kind of just a unique identifier. Then we have a priority, which depending on the priority, rules are evaluated depending on that, but all of them are set to 1 in this case. Then we have the action, which means that the matched request will be blocked. So the action is what we're doing is we're blocking the request. And so then we have the condition, so this right here, which contains the condition under which the rule applies. So if the condition is met, then we're going to block this request. But instead of the URL filter, here we have our string. And so this right here means to match any subdomain. So it doesn't matter what website we're on. All that we're going to be checking is going to be this ad domain. So if we see an ad coming from this domain, then we're going to be blocking it. And then of course we have the resource type, which is going to be the types of resources that we want this rule to apply to. And then the first one is going to be script. So that's just going to be any JavaScript files. Then we have images. So all of the image ads, and then we have the XML HTTP request, which is network requests made from JavaScript, so API calls, and then all the other ones follow the same thing, but these are just going to be different domains. So this one is going to be the double click facebook.net. Then there's going to be the Google Ad Services, and then there's going to be a few other ones. So if we, for example, copy this and we try to look for it, so if I paste it in Chrome, we can see that it's a Google-owned digital advertising platform. And again, all that this rules does is it's kind of like a list of all of the different ad platforms that we want to block. And so you can add more of them if you want to, but the more you have, the slower the extension is going to work, of course. But I found that these 4 are the ones that are used most common, and they're going to work very well for you. So we're going to stay with that. But now we're going to go ahead and write all of the background.js. And of course, I'm going to go over how everything works. So this is probably going to be the most difficult part of this video. So of course, make sure you listen to everything and try to remember some of it. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to run the ad blocker as soon as the extension is installed, which means that it's going to be on if it's not. So enabled is true. So here we're going to run chrome.runtime.on installed. I'm not sure that was, but chrome.runtime.on installed add event listener, or sorry, there's not event, but just add listener. And then here we're going to run a callback function. And here we are going to say something, but to remove this error, even though there's no error, it just says Chrome is not defined, we are going to say this right here. So global Chrome, and now the error should go away if I did this right. So there it is. Now let's go back to writing. Here we're going to write chrome.declarative net request. So declarative net request. And again, I'm going to explain all of this once we're done writing it, but update enabled rule sets. And then in here, we are going to write enable rule set IDs. And this one is going to be set to rule set _1. So the chrome.runtime.onInstalled event listener, what it does is it runs once the extension is installed or updated. And what this code does right here, it enables the ad block rule set. So again, this rule set over here, which is defined as rule set _1. And then another thing that we're also going to do is we're going to add a local storage. So chrome.storage.local.set, and we're going to set ad block enabled to be true. And then let's also add the pages, might as well. So pages will be blank, same goes for the websites. And I'm going to show you what this is, but it's not really in the local storage, it's in a different place, but it's pretty much the exact same thing. So right now, if we run npm run build, I'm going to go in here, update everything, and let's open it. So here's going to be our ad blocker. I'm going to search for a website with ads to test ad blocker, and here it is. So if I refresh, we can see that there's no ads, and that's because it's enabled. And of course, there's not really a way to enable it, but what we're going to do is turn it off. And now if we refresh the page, we can see that all of the ads are back. So again, let's turn it back on and refresh the page. Now there's no ads, but now let's actually work on making it work depending on the toggle over here. So let's go back to our background.js. And now we're going to go inside of the app.jsx, and we're going to make a function which is going to toggle the rule set over here. So let's go ahead and create it over here. So const, we're going to call it toggle ads. Here we're going to be getting a value, and then here we're going to run chrome.declare. So pretty much just the same thing as in here. So chrome.declarative net request update enabled rule sets. And then here we are going to run enable rule sets ID. And then if the value is true, then we are going to run the rule set _1, which again is going to be this file right here. Also, it's going to be blank, so it's just not going to work. And then we are going to have disable rule sets ID. And this is going to be the exact same thing, but just flipped. So if value is false, then we are going to disable all our rule set _1, and everything should work. But we are getting this error, so what I'm going to do is copy this and paste it right over here, which should disable it. So there we go. We have no more Chrome errors. And now if we copy that, we're going to put it inside of the toggle section. Let's open it. And here we are going to get it. And then right over here, we have our handle toggle. What we're going to do is we're going to run it in here. We're going to create the new value. So a new value, which will be not enabled. And we're going to set enabled based on that. So paste this in here. Same with this. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to save this in our local storage. So this will be the ad block enabled block. Let's see if I misspelled it. So we have it in the background, so I did not. So that will be set to json.stringify, new value. And we're also going to save it inside of the local storage and inside of the Chrome's local storage. So inside of a different local storage. So chrome.storage, and I'll go why over in a second, but local.set, and we're going to set the ad block enabled to be new value. And of course, we also do have to add this syntax in here so that this wouldn't be an error. But pretty much the only reason that we're using chrome.storage.local.set is that we can access it inside of the background.js file, because we can't access the normal local storage from there. And so now if we save this, this should be working. So let's go back in here. Let's refresh everything. See if there's no errors. Okay, so we can go back in here. Now we can see that there's no errors. If we set that to false, we go in here. Let's go to our application. We can go to local storage. I'm going to increase everything. We can see that ad block enabled is set to false. And then if we go to external storage and we go to local, we can see that we have our ad block enabled, pages and websites, which again we set inside of the background.js. But I updated something, so I'm going to set this to be false just to make sure that this works. And now if we refresh, we can see that this is set to false. Same goes in here, that is set to false, which means that now if we refresh the page, we can see that we have all of these ads. And if we set this back to true and we refresh the page again, there are going to be no ads. So now that we're done with that, we are going to have to make a function that gets the saved data, because right now we can see that it's going to be off, but as soon as we open it, it's going to say that the ad block is on even though it's not. So let's go back to our app.jsx, and here, let's just say above toggle ads, we're going to create our get saved data function. And then let's also run a use effect, which will call this function. So get saved data. So right over here, what we're going to do is we're going to get all of the data from our local storage. And let's actually go back to our toggle section.jsx. And so right over here, where we're updating our ad block enabled inside of our local storage, we're actually going to remove that, because from now on, we're only going to be using this chrome.storage.local.set. So we're going to go in here, application, and we can see that inside of extension local way of storing data, but this is the one that we can actually use inside of the background.js file. So we're going to be using only that instead of both of them, just so that our code is cleaner. So to access it, we're going to run chrome.storage.local.get, and here we have to use square brackets, but here we're going to say what we want to get the ad block enabled. Then we're also going to have theme, so that's going to be saved in our local storage too. Then we're going to have pages and websites. And here is where we can actually access them. So here we're going to be, of course, getting the ad block. So ad block enabled, theme, pages, and websites. And then let's just console log the ad block enabled, and we're not going to have the theme. So let's go back to our background.js file, and we're going to add it in here. So theme, we're going to set that to false. Then we're going to go inside of our toggle theme, and we're going to run chrome.storage.local.set, and then theme be not theme. And that should be it for that. So let's see if we're getting anything. Let's also try to console log the theme to see if this works. So npm run dev, or sorry, npm run build, and then we can go in here. Let's update everything. Go to our console, and we're getting true and false. So true would be for our ad blocker. So that's going to be true, and then our theme will be false. So we can see that everything works. And again, if we go in here, we can see that ad block enabled is true and theme is set to false. Now we just have to update everything. So all that we have to do here is set enabled to be ad block enabled, and same goes for the theme. So set theme to be theme. And for the pages and websites, we're gonna work on that in a bit, but for now we are going to actually add the square brackets in here so that this only runs once and not every time a hook updates. So now everything should be working. Let's update everything, and now this should be set to false. And then if we press on our brush, close and open it again, we can see that our brush saves, and same should be with our ad blocking. So there it is, now it's false, and then we can set that back to true, and we can see that everything saves. But now let's go ahead and work on the refresh so that whenever we actually toggle our ad blocker, we can refresh the page or the button comes out. So let's go ahead and create a function called toggle refresh. And here we are going to set refresh be not refresh. And here we're gonna use chrome.tabs.query to use the active tab. So we'll set that to true. And then same goes for current window. We're also gonna set that to true. And here's where we're going to reload. So we're gonna write chrome.tabs.reload, the tab that we're currently on. So 0.id. And now we should be able to use this function. So whenever we press on our image here, page should refresh. So let's add non-click. Let's run toggle refresh. And then let's go inside of our toggle section. Here, let's set our refresh. So let's pass in refresh and then set refresh in here. So here we're going to be able to get it, refresh, and then set refresh, because right over here, we can set refresh to not refresh. And let's also put it at the very bottom, and this should work. So let's go to our terminal, and of course run npm run build, go back in here, update everything. And if we toggle our ad blocker, we can see this nice animation. And when we press on it, the page refreshes and we can see that the ad blocker is off. And same goes for if we turn it back on and press on the button again, it refreshes and then our ad blocker is on. So now the only few things that we have to do is make these two toggles actually work. And of course the theme change whenever we press on our brush over here. So let's start with our page, then move on to the website, and then finish off with the themes. So let's go back to our bottom section, and we're going to use our handle pages toggle. Or actually, before we do that, we're going to have to go inside of our app.jsx, here where we go to get save data, and here we're going to have to set our pages. So enabled is going to be dependent if the current URL matches with any of the saved URLs. So let's go in here to get save data. And we can go under, and here we're going to get the current tab that we're on. So we're going to run chrome.tabs.query. And again, we're going to use the active tab, so true. And then current window, which is also going to be true. Then we're going to be getting the tabs. And here we are going to create a variable of the current URL that we're on. So URL, that'll be tabs. And then we're going to be using the very first one, .url. And let's actually go ahead and console log the tab just so that we can see that this works. So URL, run npm run build. We're going to go in here, update, and here if we inspect and go in here, we can see that this is the URL that we're currently on. And even if I press on it, we can see that it's going to open it. So this is the right URL, which means that this is going to be the active URL that we're on, which we're going to set current to be. So right over here, set pages to be pages with the current of URL. And now for the enabled, so enabled, this will be dependent on the saved pages. So we're going to move this inside of the other chrome.storage.local that we have, or I guess the one that we have in this function. And let's rename pages to be saved pages and websites to be saved websites, because right over here we have our URL. And then let's create a variable which will be pages enabled, because we're also going to have one for websites. And then this one will be dependent on saved pages dot. And what we're going to be storing is not going to be the whole variable. It's actually just going to be an array of all of the saved pages that we should have. So that would mean that it's just going to be an array. So we're going to run saved pages dot includes, and then we are going to put the URL in here. And in case there's nothing in there, we can put the question mark in there. But here we are going to put the pages enabled. And now let's test if this actually works. So let's turn this page off. So let the ads load, but here let's refresh and we have ads for some reason. So let's see why. Ad block is on. For some reason we have ads in here. So refresh. And that's because we have to go back into the background and fix something. So currently what's happening is we're disabling the ad blocker. And when we go to the next page, so this page, the setting is still set to off because we haven't done anything in the background.js to check if the new page that we're currently on is in the array, because if it's not, then we should turn the ad blocker back on. So let's go ahead and write that logic. So we're going to use on updated event listener now. And again, I'm going to go over this once we're done. So it's going to be chrome.tabs.onUpdated.add listener. And then here we're going to get a tab ID, change info, and then also the tab. And then here we're going to be checking if the changed info.status is complete, and also check if tab.url. And we're also going to check if it's valid URL, which is going to be a function that we're going to create. But here we're going to pass in the tab.url. And here we're going to have our function. Let's copy this, create a function for that. Const is valid URL. And all what this function is going to do is it's going to check if the URL starts with HTTP or HTTPS, and it skips URLs like Chrome files, about blank, and so on. So for example, this right here, we have Chrome, and so this is one of the paths that it would skip. So let's go back into here, and to do that, we're going to write return. And for this part, it's pretty hard to narrate it, so just copy after me, but HTTPS, we have our question mark, and then these lines dot test, and then URL. And this test right here is going to be a method that returns a Boolean value that indicates whether or not a pattern exists in a searched string. And now inside here, we're getting an error for some reason, empty block element. So that just means we have to add some information in there. And here we're going to start by checking our storage. So we're going to run chrome.storage.local.get. And if I'm being completely honest, we can go inside here and copy this. So copy all of that. We're going to paste it in here. And let's see. So here we're getting all of our arrays, and then we can close that. So there we go. And then right over here, we don't really need to set pages to be saved pages. Same goes for the website. So let's see, websites, keep it as a website. And so right over here, we're going to create a variable called enabled, which will be add block enabled. And then let's go ahead and actually just console log enabled, just to make sure that we're getting our variables. So npm run build. Let's refresh, go back in here, inspect, and we're getting true from our background, which means that we're getting it. So we can remove this from here. And now we're going to make a variable called should disable. So should disable. And here we're going to start with our pages, since that's the only one that we currently have, but later on we're going to add the websites, or I guess we could add it now too, but it's not really going to do anything. So pages.includes, and we're going to use the URL that we're currently on. So let's do that, or the tab.url that we're currently on. And then for the website, so websites.includes, this is going to be another variable that we're going to create in a second, but it's going to be called domain. So right over here, we're going to create a variable called domain. And so for the domain here, we're going to run new URL with the tab.url.hostname. Hostname. And again, the hostname is, for example, if we go back in here, this right here would be the hostname. So this part right here, and we can also console log it just so that you can see. So let's do domain, and currently the domain is not going to do anything because we're not really saving the websites yet, but we will after we're done with this. So should disable, and then here we're going to run chrome.declarative net request update enabled rule sets. And here we're going to set our enable rule set IDs to be a ternary operator. So if enabled is set to true, and then also our should disable is set to false, then we're going to disable our rule set _1, else we are going to disable. So disable rule set IDs, and here we're only going to disable it if our enabled is set to false, so enabled, or should disabled is set to true, then of course we're going to disable our rule set _1, and then else we're not going to disable anything. So let's run npm run build. For some reason it's showing an error, and that'll be for the theme, so we can always remove that. Let's update everything, add listener, cannot read properties of undefined. Let's see if the error is still there. So let's refresh everything. Here's our ad blocker. Let's turn it off on this page. Go on this page, refresh, and we can see that there are no ads. But if we go back in here and refresh again, there's ads. So now we also do have to fix this, because even though it says off here and it's off, it says on here, but it's an easy fix. So here it's off, and here it's still kind of trying to show it. So there's another thing that we can do for that. But before we do it, let's remove the theme just like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a function out of all of this. And I forgot to show the domain, so let's go back, inspect, and we can see that the domain actually matches. So this part right here, but let's go and remove this and create a new function. So const update add blocking. So blocking, and here we are going to pretty much just copy all of this. So copy this, or I'm going to cut it in this case. and we're going to change this to be URL. Same goes for this, and we're going to be passing in a URL in here, and over here we can run updated ad blocking. And here, actually, one more thing that I forgot to mention is at the start I said that this right here on updated, I said that it updates every time you open a new tab, but I meant to say that it actually fires up all of this whenever the tab finishes loading. So whenever the tab that you're currently on finishes loading, then it runs the updated ad blocking function that we currently have, and we can actually make another one. So this should be the second layer of protection, but the first one would be whenever you actually open a new tab. So for that one, it would have to run chrome.webnavigation.onCommitted.addListener, and here we are going to be getting a tab ID, frame ID, and then also a URL. And we're going to start by checking if the frame ID, so frame ID equals to 0, and then also is valid URL, so we're going to use that function again. And then here we are going to get the tab that we're currently on. So to do that, we're going to write chrome.tabs.get. So here we're getting a tab ID and then a tab. So here again, we're using the tab ID that we currently have. So that would be the new page that we're opening, and then we're getting the new tabs information. So here we're going to check if the tab actually has a URL, and if it does, and then also the URL is valid, so tab.url, then we're going to update the ad blocking here, and that should be it. So let's make sure that this works. Let's refresh, and let's turn it off on this page. Let's go on this page and refresh, and now we can see that there's no big box here of nothing. So what I mean by that is if I actually comment this out and go back, so I'm going to refresh this. If I update this, well, we can see that the ad blocker is back on, but let's turn it off. And now if we go back in here, we can see that there's a big box here, which would have been an ad, but now it got removed. And by adding this function right here, which turns on the ad blocker before page loads, we can see that that doesn't happen. So let's run this again. npm run build, update this, and let's try to do this again. So let's turn this off, and now we can see that nothing has changed, which means that all of this works perfectly well. Now there's something I want to fix real quick. So currently we can see that the pages is off, but it says that it's on here, and all that we have to do is go back in here. Let's close all of these tabs. We have to go back to our get save data, and right over here where we're setting enabled, we first have to check if our pages is enabled, and only after that we can set our enabled. So right over here to be pages enabled. So if pages is enabled, and we're going to have one for websites enabled, but for now we're just going to set this to ad block enabled. And let's actually go back to the background, make sure there's no more themes here. So now everything should be good. Let's run this again just to make sure that it works. So we're going to turn it off on this page, or I'm not sure if it fully updated, so I'm going to try this again. Update this, refresh, it's off even though it's on over there. So pages, and again that's because this has to be not pages. And let's run this again. So update, it's going to be on. If we turn it off for this page, close and open it again, we can see that it's off right now. But if we turn it back on, close and open it again, it's still false. So that's another thing that we would have to fix. It's also pretty easy. We're going to go to the toggle section. Right over here, we're going to set our saved to be pages.saved.filter, and then page. We're going to make sure that the page doesn't equal to pages.current. Let's actually just make this an if statement. So if, and then we're going to set pages, and then we're also going to set, so chrome.storage.local.set, and then we're going to set pages to be the new pages. And then actually we're going to create a variable for the new pages or the new saved pages. So new pages now would be, cut this out, paste it in here. This will be new pages, and then we're going to set pages as new pages. And of course later on we're going to add the websites, but for now this should be good. So let's update everything, and if we turn this off and then turn this back on, there's no more ads and it works perfectly well. And now let's finally work on the website toggle. And now for the websites, we're going to go to the bottom section and find the handle websites toggle, and we're pretty much going to copy what we have from here inside of this function. So let's actually go ahead and do that. Paste that right over here, and new value is going to be websites, and this is going to change to new websites. And right over here, this is going to be websites. It's going to be websites. Same in here. This is going to be a website, and then this is going to be websites.current, and then we're going to save this inside of websites, and we're going to set the value to be the new websites. Here we are going to set websites. This is going to be websites. This will stay at new value. This will be new websites, set enabled, toggle ads, and refresh. And this should be working. So let's go ahead and console log our websites. Right over here, run npm run build, update the extension, and let's take a look at what we have right now. So currently we have current of null for some reason. So let's see if anything happens when we press on that. So current is still null, which means that we have to go inside of the app and actually set our websites here. So I completely forgot to do that. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And we're actually going to create a new variable before we do that. So we're going to have our domain here, which will be new URL, just like in the background script. So url.hostname, and then here we are going to create a new variable which will be websites enabled, and that will be dependent on if the saved websites, which will be coming from the local storage, has our current website in there, which, or not the website but the domain. So domain, and then right over here we can copy this, set websites, current will be domain, enabled will be not websites enabled, and saved will be saved websites, which is coming right from here. And now let's run this again, update the extension, and let's see. So now if we take a look at our current, we can see that we have the domain enabled is true, but if we press on it, we can see that now enabled is false. We have our saved with the current domain in there, and if we go to application, we can see that instead of websites we have our domain. So we can see that if we refresh, our ad blocker is not working anymore, and if we go to a different page from the same domain, we can see that it's still disabled, but now it says that our ad blocker is on even though it's off, and that's a very easy fix. But if we disable it now, refresh, go back to this page, we can see that it's back on. So now we have to go back here and let's also add not websites enabled, and that should be it. So let's take a look again, update, let's turn it off, refresh, close it, open it again, and now we can see that it's off. And now let's try to play around and see if anything weird happens. So let's turn off our page. We can see that everything works the exact same way. If we turn back our website, it says that it's on even though it's off. But now if we go to the different page, it should be on because now websites is on and the page is only off on this website. And we're also going to have to fix this right here, but let's refresh and we can see that it's on here, but it's going to be off in here. And let's try to see how this small mistake happens. So if we turn websites off, turn pages off, and turn websites back on, we can see that it's on. So that would have to be something inside of the websites. So bottom section, and right over here we're only going to enable it if the pages.enabled is set to true. So now if we do this again, let's update everything and turn this off, turn this back on, and we can see that it still says that it's off. And if we refresh, everything works very well. And if we turn this back on, we can see that the page turns back on too. Let's turn everything off and turn this back on. So, and that just means that we have to fix this for the website too. So we have to toggle the website on whenever we press on the ad blocker here. So let's go back to the toggle section, and here we are going to do the same thing in here. So const new websites, and that will be websites.saved.filter, and we do have to pass in websites, but we can do that after we're done with this. Website doesn't equal to websites.current, and then of course we're going to set websites to be ... websites, and then enabled to be new value, and saved will be the new websites. And finally we are going to run chrome.storage.local.set. So we're going to update the local storages too. And now the last thing to do is pass in the websites. So websites and set websites. Go back in the app. We can actually remove this console log because everything is working. Find our toggle section and we're going to add it right over here, just like that. And let's check it one more time. So update, let's turn both of these off, turn this back on, refresh, and let's take a look at our saved. So we can see that there's no websites. If we turn it off, we have the domain, but then if we turn it back on, it's gone from the array. And now that we're done with the full Chrome extension, we're going to move on to Three.js and adding a nice 3D model here. And I do have to warn you that you are going to get an error. And what I mean by that is this is my very first version, and it's misspelled because I'd get an error. But if we go to details, but if I actually try to run it, so it should be right over here. If I run it, we can see that it's off, but I'm going to get an error, and that's because Three.js uses WebAssembly, and it caused an error because of the content security policy, and everything's going to run perfectly well. So here's going to be the website. I can turn it on and off, and we can see that everything works, but it's just this one error, or actually two, but they don't really do anything because, well, it works works perfectly well. So if you don't want any of that, then of course you can leave it like this and maybe take off the brush, or maybe just add a different theme. But this is just a quick little warning. And also right now I made a commit for this version, so if you want to take a look at before Three.js and after, then you can definitely take a look at that in the GitHub repository. But we're going to start by installing, so npm install a few dependencies. So the first one is going to be 3, then we're going to have at react 3dre, and then at react 3fiber, and now press on enter and wait for everything to install. Now that everything is done, we are actually going to go to the bottom section and comment all of this code out. Same goes in here, and that should be it. And that's because we don't want anything Chrome related running in the background, or else we'll get errors. And I'm gonna actually show you what I mean by that. So if I run npm run dev and try to open this, there it is. Go to inspect. We can see that we get errors like local and this and that, and that's because all of this code is for the Chrome extension, and if we get these errors, nothing is going to show up. So we're just going to comment this code for now so that we can see, so that we can work on Three.js and making it look nice, because this is all visual. There's not too much logic in here. So let's comment this out too. And let's see if we get any errors still. So let's refresh. We do, and that's because we have in the app, we have toggle refresh. That's fine. Toggle theme. We are going to comment out the chrome.storage.local.set. Toggle ads, we can leave that. And then right over here, all of this, we are going to comment this out. And let's see if we still have an error. So we don't anymore. Let's add the border so that we can actually see the boundaries. So border 2, there it is. I'm going to put it on the right side, just like that. And now we just have to make sure that when we press on the button, we can toggle the enabled here. So let's go to the toggle section, and all that we are going to do is run these two so we can turn it on and off. But now we are going to create a component which is going to be called the basic toggle, and this is going to be the one that we're currently using. So there's nothing that we have to do here. That's too complicated, so run this. And then of course we would have to pass in enabled and handle toggle. And the reason we're not going to run handle toggle here is because it's going to be the same for the basic toggle and the 3D one, so that we wouldn't have to create this function twice. Let's go ahead and pass it here. So basic toggle, and then enabled and handle toggle. Let's actually write it like this: enabled handle toggle. And we're also going to get the theme. So theme, we're not going to set the theme, so that's fine. Let's pass in the theme, and that's because right over here, let's put an empty tag. But here, if the theme is set to true, then we would want to run our models. So I'm just going to put a div in here for now, an empty div. Else we are going to run basic toggle, and let's see what that looks like. So when it's set to true, currently we have nothing, of course, but when it's set to false, we have our basic toggle. So now let's go ahead and create the other one. So let's write const, I'm going to call it earth toggle, and then here we're going to get the exact same thing. So enabled and then handle toggle, and then we are going to return a canvas here. So canvas, which is going to be coming from Fiber, but we have our canvas, and inside of the canvas we can put elements and objects. But before we do any of that, let's also set the theme to be true here. So there it is, and we have our canvas. Let's add a class name here of earth canvas, and that's a class from index.css, and all it does is it changes the clip path, but earth canvas. Then we're going to set the position to be relative, cursor will be pointer, cursor pointer, and then here let's actually cut this out because we're going to be using our enabled here. So if enabled is set to true, we are going to change the opacity, and this is also optional, but it's going to be 100. Else the opacity, we can set it to 80, and then also on hover we will set the opacity to be 100. And of course we also want to add a transition of all, and then a duration of 300. Of course right now we're not going to see anything because we haven't added model, we haven't added any lights. And now that we have our canvas, now we have to add our object. And again, if you want to learn more about Three.js, I have a separate video on that. I'm not going to go over meshes because we have a model, and this model is going to be right over here. So earth.glb, and because I forgot to add the model inside of the setup portion of the video, we're going to have to download a GLTF file so that we can convert it into a React project. And if you don't want to do all of that, then of course you can go to the GitHub repository, find it, copy all of the code. But there's some code that we're also going to write in there, so you might have to miss that part of the video. So make sure they go down in the description below, find this model and make an account. And then once you made your account, we're going to download the GLTF because we already have, I'm not entirely sure which one is the one that we're going to be using, but you definitely have one of these. And then you also have the 8K version, that's the highest resolution. So if you want the highest resolution, then of of course you can use it, but it will take a little bit longer for the model to load. But we're going to download the GLTF version, and once it's downloaded, you're going to want to search up GLTF to React 3 Fiber and open the first website. And then you're going to want to extract the folder because it's going to be a zipped folder, and copy textures, scene.gltf, and then also scene.bin, and drag and drop it inside of this website, because once it's done, it creates a very nice React component for us that we can copy and then go back in here. I'm going to put them side by side again together. And now we're going to go inside of our components and we're going to create earth.jsx, or actually let's put that inside of a models folder. So paste that in here. We can close the sidebar now, paste everything in here. And of course, we're going to change a few things. So we're going to change this to an error function. So const earth, and then we are going to export at the very bottom. So export default earth, and then we're going to change the path here because the right path is going to be models, and then earth.gltf, or sorry, GLB, because if you take a look here, public models earth.glb, or you can try to use the larger one, but take a look at the first model and then of course change it later on. And now we can copy this, paste it right over here. And now we have our component. Let's go ahead, and we don't need to add inside of the index.js. So let's go down in here to the toggle section, and where we have our earth toggle. Here we can put our earth just so that you can see what happens if we don't add any lights. So we're going to run earth. For some reason, the import is not showing. So let's make sure that if we go into earth, const earth, export default earth, let's go inside of the toggle and try to import it. So import earth from models earth. Now this should be working. There it is. Let's also put our earth toggle in here. And here's going to be our earth. And we can see that it's very dark and we can't see anything. And that's because we have to add lights. So let's add an ambient light with an intensity of 1, and now we can finally see our earth. And let's also add a perspective camera so that we don't have to change the sizing of the earth. So perspective camera, we're going to make this default, and for the position we're going to set this to be at 0, 0, and then 2.7. There it is. And if we really want to make it look nicer, we can also add a directional light. So directional light, and let's set the position to be 3 to 1 and see what it looks like. So there it is. You can play around and see whichever position you like the most, but maybe we can try that at 0. And I think I'm going to keep it at 3, 2, 1. So 2 and then 1, because this looks pretty nice. And now we can add the rotation. So for that, we're going to go inside of our earth, and here's where we're going to animate it. So we are going to create a ref, which we'll be using useRef. And of course, we're going to put the ref inside of the group. So ref of ref. We're going to use a hook, which is going to be called useFrame. And in here, I'm going to actually just console log something so that you can see how this works. But let's just say 1, and if we go ahead and inspect, we can see that we get a bunch of 1s, and that's because useFrame runs 60 frames per second, and that's what lets us animate our model. And since we have our group here, we can also get the positioning. So we're gonna ref.current, which will be our model, and then we're gonna use the rotation, and we're gonna add to the x value by 0.01. Let's save, and now we can see that it's rotating pretty fast. Let's add 0.01. That looks pretty nice. Let's add another rotation. So let's do the same for the y, and let's also do the same for z. So current, and then let's rotate the z. And now we can see that it's rotating in all axes, and it looks really nice. So let's refresh. Here's going to be the animation. And of course, you can change it to whatever you want. You can change this to a negative if you wanted to. It's really all up to you. And now we are going to add our on and off text over here. So let's go to the toggle section, find our canvas, and here we're going to use an HTML tag, which I haven't went over in my previous video, but it's very simple. We can add an HTML tag inside of our canvas here. We're going to set this to be center, and we can write our React code in here now. So h1. Here we're going to have a bunch of classes to make it look really nice. So we're going to start by setting the text to be 3XL. Let's also write the actual text in here. So if enabled is set to true, then it's going to be on, else it's going to be off. And we're getting an error, and that's because it's not all capitalized. It's the H is capitalized, and then it's HTML. Let's HTML. There we go. Here's going to be our text. And if we press on it, we haven't added the on click yet, but let's add all the other classes. So actually, let's refresh. I don't like these errors. So we're going to add a font of semi-bold, then tracking of wider. We're going to drop a shadow of large. We're also going to add a transition of all, and we're also going to add a duration of 300. And if it's enabled, so enabled, we are going to set the text color. Before we do that, let's fix this, but we're going to set the text color to be blue, else it's going to be straight up white, so text white. And then we're also going to change the scale a little to 90, and let's also actually change this right here to be bold. And let's add the handle toggles. So right over here, let's add an on click handle toggle, and now when we press on it, we can see this nice little effect. And maybe we can change the duration to be a little longer, so 500 maybe, and that looks really nice. And there's another thing I want to do is we can see that it kind of just jumps whenever we turn off the background here. So go back to the app.jsx and let's add a transition here. Transition of all, and then also a duration of maybe 500 and see what that looks like. And yeah, there it is. It looks way better. And when we toggle this, everything works. And we can see that it takes a while for the extension to load. So let's see what happens if we change the earth here to be the larger model. So go to our public, I'm just going to copy this, change this to larger earth, same goes with this. And now we're going to see that it looks a little bit different because it's high resolution. And when we change it, it does take way longer for it to load, but it does look a little bit better. And one thing that we can do is have it running in the background even if it's set to off, but that's just going to drain your resources, and it's better to just not have it and have maybe this little delay, but it's totally fine. And now we should be able to run everything. So let's uncomment everything, starting up with the app. And now we're gonna get a big error when we refresh. There it is. Nothing's gonna work, but it's totally fine. So let's comment this out or uncomment it. And I think we're left with the bottom section. So let's fix this. Same goes with the handle pages toggle, and we're not using the enabled, so let's go ahead and remove that, and everything should be finished. So let's run npm run build, and we can see how much longer this takes just because there's way more modules, and it does take way more space too. And so that's why we did this at the very end, because if we had to run build a lot of times, then it would just waste a lot of time. So let's go and open this, and hopefully everything should work. So here's going to be our extension. We do have to remove the border, but here's going to be our earth, and we can see that it's working. When we hover it, there's not really much difference, so maybe that's one thing that we have to fix. When we turn it off, we can see that it rotates, and actually we do have to do one more thing. I completely forgot about that, and that would be to change the rotation speed a little, so that's definitely my bad. Let's go back to earth. Let's go in here, and it's very basic. And actually, before we do that, I don't want to forget to remove the border, so let's remove that from here. Let's go back to bottom section, toggle section, go to earth, and right over here we're going to say that if enabled, we do have to pass that too. So if enabled and ref.current.scale.x is bigger or equal to 0.95. So we're also going to decrease the scale a little bit depending on if it's enabled or not. So const enabled, which will be coming from props. We can move that in here, and right over here we can pass enabled. So enabled will be enabled, and let's go back to earth. Else we are going to do the same thing. So else if enabled is set true, and also the ref.current.scale.x smaller or equal to 0.99, then we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to add on to it, and let's try to run npm run build. Now hopefully everything should be done, and there it is. We can see how much longer it takes. Of course, it took 7 seconds. It's pretty wild, but it's on. When we press on it, we can see that it's way smaller, and then it increases in size. Of course, we can make it increase by less. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set this to 0 to 5, and same for the increasing. And if you want to play with it a little, you can try 0.9, and it's going to be a little bit smaller, or you can set it to bigger, but this is the default scale that we were writing everything with. And now if we update everything, change this back to on, we can see our earth, and then it takes much longer, but everything looks really nice. And now the opacity actually works, so that's really nice. But I'm going to go back and change it back to 0.95 because I don't want a very large difference. And actually one more thing, if we go to the background here, if you want to start with the earth, you can set theme to be true. And whenever you update the extension or do anything, you're going to start off with the earth. So let's wait for this to update. Did everything. And again, we have errors, but everything works even with them. So now we can see that we're starting off with the earth here. And of course, again, everything else works. We can turn this off on this page. If we go to this page, it's still off because we turned off the ad blocker. But let's say that we turned it off only for this page. It's going to be off in here, but the ad block isn't going to work on this page. We can turn it off on the whole website. And of course, here it's not going to work either way because the page and the website is disabled. But if we turn everything back on, then again, our ad blocker is going to work. And of course, you can change themes and everything saves and it looks really nice. And I bet that you learned a lot of new information from this video. So make sure to leave a like if you did, because this is where I'm going to end it. So after you leave a like, make sure that you subscribe to this channel to not miss any upcoming content like this. And make sure to leave a comment down below if you have any questions or if you have anything else you'd like to say. And hopefully see you in the next video.